Hi, my name is Bobby Milstein. I'm Director of System Strategy at Rethink Health, and I want to tell a quick story about what it takes for everyone to thrive together. Now, we're very far from that situation now, but there is a worldwide movement animated by people and organizations who are stepping up as shared stewards of our lives together. There's a lot of hard, healthy work to do, but there are good reasons to believe that this movement can spring forward with great force and direction. In fact, it may not succeed without you and many other people joining into the work. Now, our well-being relies on a system designed long ago that was never built for everyone to thrive. And there have been moments of great accomplishment, which we should cherish, but it can be far more effective, more equitable, and resilient than it is. Now, the people who do this work uh, are, are best understood as system stewards, right? Unlike a leader who leads on behalf of their own issue or institution, um, stewards are people and organizations who take responsibility for working with others to expand the conditions that everyone needs to thrive, beginning with those who are struggling and suffering. Now, stewards can be affiliated with an organization or they can act on their own, like a community resident, but they have a particular orientation around purpose, power, and wealth. Purposes are always larger than themselves. They care about their own purposes, but they're situated in issues that are bigger. Uh, they view power as something to be built and distributed with others, not consolidated. And they view wealth as something to be invested, not withheld, to create long-term value and to alleviate short-term needs. Now, if lots of people and organizations are working as stewards, it helps to have a unifying and measurable goal. Uh, and in this context, we believe it's possible to organize around a single expectation of all people and places thriving, with no exceptions. That's not only a sort of soaring aspiration, but it actually turns out to be one of our best measures in all of social science is a overall life evaluation that helps us understand who's thriving, who's struggling and suffering. Um, Today, some people are thriving, but many are not. And there's a lot of work to do if we want to achieve this expectation of all people and places thriving with no exceptions. In the year 2020, that got a whole lot harder. Gallup, as an organization, has tracked well-being across the US and around the world for more than a decade. And we can see that right after the Great Recession, there was a big drop in the percent of US adults who felt like they're thriving. And there was some recovery, but it hovered around the mid 50s on average until the early months of 2020 when it plummeted to its 12-year low in the in an effort to confront the COVID pandemic. And that single measure doesn't really tell the whole story of what people are going through. In fact, there's a lot more than COVID itself that's in play. This is not just one infectious disease that we're contending with. It's tangled up with a number of other threats, deep in centuries-long injustice. That the wider consequences of social isolation that show up as mental illness and deaths of despair, and the kind of intertwined afflictions of violence and addiction and housing distress and food insecurity, unemployment. We don't have to look any further than the headlines to understand that we're immersed in a complicated set of issues that no one of which alone is the full story of what it takes to thrive together. Definitely subgroups among us are experiencing this differently, and Gallup has its thriving measures tracked by race, and you can easily see that Black Americans are much less likely to thrive and had steeper drops when the conditions are such that they're not set up for everyone to thrive. So we see racial distinctions underneath these averages. And if we zoom out, we can see America is in the midst of a sweeping set of crises, health crises we haven't seen in a century, economic crises that we haven't seen in 80 years, a reckoning with racial justice, unprecedented since the civil rights, since the mid 60s, and climate catastrophes and tests of our democratic norms that we have never seen in human history or in certainly America's history. So generations before us have endured sweeping adversity. Sometimes they find the strength to make a great stride toward well-being and justice. The question is, what is going to happen now with us? Our resilience and humanity are once again being tested. Now, our colleague Otto Scharmer is very famous for observing that as systems collapse, people rise. And that single dynamic explains how people with a just cause can transform failing systems for the better. In April and May of 2020, more than 100 people and organizations came together to think about how we can convert loss into renewal. And what we find in the Thriving Together Springboard is a narrative of hope, an understanding that America's communities have an immense reservoir of resilience that could propel our nationwide movement toward this expectation of all people and places thriving with no exceptions. Now, understanding the nature of what that work entails, it helps to differentiate two ways of seeing well-being. We can think about it at a personal level, how we think, feel, and function. That's what Gallup is measuring when we see who feels like they're struggling and who's thriving. But if we want to stack the deck in favor of entire populations of people thriving, we have to look at our surroundings. There is oftentimes we can encounter adversity, and we might temporarily need urgent services to regain our best possible health and well-being. And then there are a set of vital conditions that are not temporary. They're properties of places and institutions that we all need all the time to reach our full potential. The key thing to understand about these is that our personal experience of well-being over time can rise and fall, and it's sort of within the bounds of our lifespan from birth to death. But these vital conditions and the urgent services, they exist and persist over generations. We encounter them on day one, and they're going to persist even after our own lifetime. So here we're talking about the vital conditions for intergenerational well-being. And this focus on conditions is not new. Public health as an entire field, is understood and was reaffirmed by the Institute of Medicine as what we do as a society to assure the conditions in which all people can be healthy. But for more than 30 years, as this definition has been widely embraced, we've never really come to consensus about what those conditions are. Our field is fraught with disarray and disorientation. Sometimes we get in our own way at trying to pursue the work of establishing conditions for thriving, because we're talking very often in euphemisms about this work. We talk broadly about some mix of downstream and upstream care. Sometimes it's a quest to find the right mix of prevention and treatment and protection. We talk about social determinants of health and social determinants of equity. We classify things in broad sociological categories of healthcare, behavior, socioeconomic environment, and environmental factors. Those euphemisms, while being useful in some settings to help make distinctions, are not specific enough to guide our routine daily work of establishing the conditions that we all need to thrive. We have to move beyond the era of euphemism and talk really concretely about the work that we need to do together. And the good news is that for the last several years, there has been growing enthusiasm to organize around a set of vital conditions. We all need a thriving natural world. We have basic needs for health and safety, clean air and clean water and nutritious food and sleep and freedom from addiction and trauma and violence, routine healthcare. We need humane housing, meaningful work and wealth, lifelong learning, reliable transportation, and a sense of belonging and civic muscle. People need to feel connected to others and to feel that they can contribute and do things that none of us can do alone. Many organizations are beginning to understand and embrace these vital conditions, and we're recognizing that while they're all interdependent, belonging and civic muscle occupies a very special position in this. It's both a vital condition. We need to feel connected and that we can contribute. And it's a practical capacity that's necessary for success in any of these other areas of work. And so we depict it as wrapping around and running through all of the other areas of work. So getting even more practical about this, vital conditions may be something that we can all focus on, but if they are not fulfilled or disrupted in any way, then the demand for urgent services will predictably grow. Right? When these vital conditions are not fully in place, we can see growing demand for acute care for illness or injury, or addiction treatment, or crime response, environmental cleanup. homeless services, unemployment and food assistance. These are not the only urgent services, but they're the big ticket items that any of us might need at some point in our lives. And they are life-altering, life-saving helps. But you can see that the task really is to work out a balanced portfolio among these things. And there are colleagues across the country who, for the last several years, have really been experimenting with how to negotiate and design a regional portfolio of investments that fits the needs and possibilities of each community. We're learning a lot about what it takes to develop these regional portfolios. And in this next section, I just want to walk through some of the major insights of what we see that work requiring. So already you can sort of begin this map by understanding the complementary but different roles. The vital conditions are the things that actually produce well-being and equity. And it is these experiences of adversity and urgent need, like enduring illness and injury and poverty and addiction or homelessness or violence and pollution and sweeping disasters. These are the things that actually produce the experience of struggling and suffering. And depending on which one prevails, we can see a thriving spiral as vital conditions get better and there's less need, less adversity, or we can see a suffering spiral set in. If we underinvest or divest in those vital conditions, then adversity can build, more and more people are struggling and suffering, and that is an intergenerational, that dynamic can spread across neighborhoods and over generations. Now, these vital conditions and sources of adversity come from how we treat each other. We are unique people in a common world, and our legacies for living together are really important to understand. And they come in sort of two varieties. There's legacies that affirm dignity and inclusion for everyone. That builds our sense of belonging and civic muscle. Everybody belongs, everybody can contribute. And in turn, that allows us to expand all of the other vital conditions. The opposite kinds of legacies are ones that inflict trauma and exclusion. They dehumanize us all. They other some at the expense of, create us and them distinctions, and that amplifies adversity. It breaks down our belonging and civic muscle, and it fuels an intergenerational suffering spiral. Now, these legacies can also get reinforced over time, and they can eclipse each other. Every generation has to decide which legacies to continue and which ones to leave in the past. Every step toward inclusion brings us closer to a thriving commonwealth. But when we harm each other, turn a blind eye to affliction in our midst, then we create this self-defeating trap that pulls us all down. Now, against these dynamics is the possibility of stewards who can work together to steer this system toward well-being and justice. That's what we mean by the arc of history bending. It can bend, but it is we as shared stewards who need to apply the pressure. And so, aware of our legacies past and future, we can reinforce the value of each step toward inclusion and reconcile the loss from legacies of past and ongoing exclusion. As a practical matter, there's two ways of exercising stewardship. It can be directed at expanding vital conditions, which can unlock immense amounts of trapped potential, or we can we can direct it at delivering urgent services to alleviate adversity and care for people in crisis. In some ways, the balance between those two is the art and science of thriving together. Now, there's also an economic part of this story. As large fractions of people in communities are struggling and suffering, that can create a lucrative market for urgent service industries. In fact, over the last 60 years, there has been a full-fledged adversity economy that has developed across the US. Think about poverty industrial complex and a prison industrial complex, a hospital industrial complex. All of those services are indispensable. We need them. They are life-altering, and they need to be delivered effectively and efficiently, equitably to every community. But it is dangerous to over-rely on these kinds of industrial complexes that depend and are built around the presence of adversity. That's a very costly thing, and it can fuel a mistaken belief that those kinds of services are enough, that there's nothing more to do. and especially if there's a perception that they're being delivered to people who are perceived as other. The flip side is that we are poised to and are in the midst of building a well-being economy, one that is centered on incentives for just purpose and profit, that focuses on expanding the vital conditions and their value and can unlock everyone's full potential. There is a robust conversation going on about reimagining capitalism and sort of being midwives to the emergence of a well-being economy. And to co-create regional, local economies that actually routinely produce these vital conditions that we all need. Now, the prospect of stepping into this kind of stewardship can liberate ourselves and our communities. It is hard, healthy work, but it doesn't just prevent things that are bad. It doesn't prevent only the leading causes of death. It can be a way to enhance the leading causes of life, to give us a sense of connection and coherence in the world, our own story of agency and intergenerativity, and ultimately hope. This kind of work is expressed first and foremost through changing our relationships with each other. Yes, we might have to respond to crises, but response is not the only work. Recovery back to normal is not all that's needed. We should recognize that there are people among us who have to find resilience every day just to survive, because the world wasn't built for them to thrive and for us all to thrive together. So investing and learning from that kind of resilience is necessary to begin the transformation that is within reach. Now, stewards of the past have over-relied on sort of the bottom half of this diagram, and those of us today and more to come over time can do much more to focus on the top half of this dynamic. So we're facing a legacy moment. There are large numbers of us who are struggling and suffering, placing immense demands on urgent services, and we have to meet that demand. But there's no amount of urgent services that can ever produce the experience of thriving. That comes only from delivering these vital conditions. And there's many short-term, immediate, pivotal moves that we can make. But this work also requires long-term persistence, thinking about the legacies, past and future, for living together, and concentrating on the prospects of renewing our civic life, our economic life, our social, emotional, and spiritual lives. Those kinds of renewals, guided by this North Star idea of all people and places thriving, can really be a path to spring forward from the loss that we have experienced and the difficulties that we endured to a much brighter future. That is going to take a movement that we believe can spring forward from this work, and momentum for that movement is gathering force all around us. Many of the ideas and possibilities of what the Springboard shows came from listening and fitting together the innovations that hundreds, thousands of organizations across the US are doing, in each in their own way. We can look specifically at the WIN network, the Wellbeing in the Nation network, which has a theory of change that mirrors and embraces all the things I've just talked about, concentrating on understanding our legacies for living together and questioning, to what extent we're organized around creating legacies that we'd be proud to pass along for our children and grandchildren, to establish these vital conditions as a daily living reality, and to see ourselves and each other as stewards working in this movement for well-being and equity. So how can any one of us begin this work? It requires sort of shifting our mindsets, our narratives, our relationships, and power dynamics. Those are tough things to tackle all at once, but we can operationalize those into questions about what we really value. What are we measuring? What are we holding ourselves accountable to do? And how do we make choices among the policies and practices and investments? We can strengthen our connections around these shared values. We can embrace new kinds of ways of doing business and look to those innovators, those pace setters who are showing that there are new ways of doing this work, and build our capacities to learn with them and to do this work more individually and together, with a view about it being intentionally interdependent. So let's stop there. There are many more places to learn about thriving together through shared stewardship. Our website at Rethink Health is a good source. The Springboard is all available at thriving.us, and the Wellbeing in the Nation Network is one of the very best places to connect with like-minded colleagues. So thank you, and we look forward to teaming up in the hard, healthy work ahead.